Cool.
Okay, great. Good afternoon. We have Leila Zegna from London. She's the managing partner of Kindred Capital. She's the founder. It's great to have you here with us this afternoon, Leila. Great to see you.
Thank you, Kinga. It's great to be here. Really excited.
I wanted to, first of all, talk a little bit about you. You founded Kindred about 5 years ago now, but you're a mathematician by training and from Yale. And you have a Harvard MBA. So how did you get into VC?
Yeah, I got into VC accidentally, really. I think it's always a fascinating question to start with because VC isn't one of those industries where there's necessarily a linear logical path. So I, like many others, hadn't charted the path to get into venture capital, and it sort of happened with connecting the dots. Looking backwards, it all makes sense, but looking forward, I really didn't have a preordained plan. I think for myself, it was always this real passion and energy for solving problems that I really cared about. And that's just been the theme in my career of things that have a really strong mission orientation at their core, where typically, and this is more on the operating side than the investing side, where I spent the bulk of my career, so the first 15 years of my career, it was meeting extraordinary entrepreneurs and then doing whatever I could to help make them successful. And in the earlier stages of my career, that was, with my own human capital. It was sort of, how can I join them, get on board with them, help make their dreams and visions a reality. And as I moved over to London in 2014, 15, I was really looking to do that again. So I wanted to meet with, the smartest, brightest, most capable entrepreneurs I could find and see how I could help them. And I was actually thinking more about starting kind of another business because that's what I had done back in Silicon Valley prior to moving over. So I was sort of looking for that problem I most cared about solving. And I realized that actually that problem that I'd identified was on the capital side. It was on the investing side. And what I had experienced as a customer of venture capital in the Valley, which is, a more mature marketplace in terms of its, venture capital has been around since the 70s there, and there's just a more dense ecosystem of competition there. I'd experienced this amazing customer experience of lots of different types of models, of lots of different types of people with different backgrounds doing things in different ways. And it wasn't just about having a pool of capital to invest out of. And I found that the founders here in Europe at the time were really underserved relative to what I'd experienced in the US, and specifically underserved with a real depth of operating capital on the investing side. So people who had kind of walked a mile in the shoes of a founder, felt the pain firsthand of what it is to build something from nothing, and wanted to invest with that kind of orientation around service and empathy. So that's what I ended up really caring about doing. And I wanted to build my next business. It just happened to be a VC firm.
That's a great story. You're on Kindred too now. Congratulations. You've just done a 90 million euro close on your second fund. So it's an amazing achievement and lots of new capital to help those founders out that you've just been talking about. And actually that brings the question, a little bit, Kindred is very special. It has an approach of equitable venture. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Of course, yeah. It's I guess back to that initial kind of founding story. It was a realization that there was less operating capital on the investment side. And so we pulled together this partnership where all four of us on the team in a partner-only model, where we didn't have principals and associates. And we felt like this was really about kind of a customer experience. Every customer being an entrepreneur, we wanted to meet with a decision maker and not someone who is a gatekeeper. And we wanted to build that, really intense relationship between an investor and an entrepreneur and not sort of have any barriers or friction between us and them. So all four partners had operating experience and had founded their own journeys. But then I think as we started to think more deeply about the model, we thought, well, venture funds are 10-year close-end funds typically, and we hope to have many of them. We're now on our second one. So at some point on that journey, your firsthand knowledge of the tools and tactics of company building gets outdated because technology changes so quickly that even a few years out of running a business, your knowledge of those networks and tools are sort of obsolete. And so the question for us was, how could we build a really current set of knowledge and know-how and network into the partnership that grows with us and that stays current with us? And we realized that actually, if we're meeting, 7, 8, 900 founders face to face every year, and we make 8 to 10 investments out of that group, that we're hand selecting those people who we think are the most ambitious, most capable founders building businesses in Europe. And actually, those are the people who have the really current set of knowledge and tools and know-how. So we said, well, what if we treated that collective group as our fifth partner? And instead of giving 20% of our carry to a fifth partner who came and joined us, we'll give 20% of our carry to that collective of entrepreneurs. And we called it equitable venture. So the concept is every founder we invest in owns a piece of the upside of the fund overall. And that means every founder owns a piece of each other's upside, has a real vested interest in each other's success. And ultimately, we think it's just a more collaborative, less lonely, kind of a nicer way of company building.
It's actually a beautiful story because it's all about collaboration, community, and helping each other. It's a really great one, and congratulations on the idea. And it looks like it's gaining a lot of support. So it's wonderful.
Thank you.
Could you just give some basics as well on Kindred, like, the stage, the ticket size, just for those in the audience who are listening to us to know when and what to approach you with?
Of course. So I think about investing as kind of 3 sides of a triangle. So you could specialize in a stage or in a sector or in a geography. And I think if you're in a really dense, kind of really saturated, mature market, you could probably do all 3 things. Our view of Europe is you probably need to choose 2 out of the 3. And so for us, we have a kind of a hyper stage orientation where we really like to be as early as possible in companies. We do both pre-seed and seed, but that is the first kind of ticket that we write and when we first get involved in companies. And then we focus on Europe. So we wouldn't be investing in anything that is, starting out in the US or in the Middle East or elsewhere. We really try and focus where we think we can be more hands-on and local. And then in terms of the kind of sectors, you end up getting quite a broad array if you're really focusing on the geo and the stage. I will say, I think we tend to gravitate towards founders who are scratching their own itch in some way, that are kind of really deeply mission orientated around the problem that they're solving, maybe a bit less opportunistic in terms of people who just want to kind of start a business and they see a real market opportunity somewhere. And not to say that those can't be great businesses. There's lots of great examples of that. But we tend to really get excited about the entrepreneur who's spent years themselves struggling with a particular problem, and they're kind of going to die trying to fix that. That really is, they're completely obsessed, is one of the words we keep coming back to, but really obsessed with solving that particular problem. And they tend to have a lot of insight because it's a problem that they themselves have felt.
Okay. Great. You mentioned earlier that you were an operator, you were an entrepreneur, today you're a VC. How do all these experiences come together? How do they influence the way you work, your decision making, and then your involvement in portfolio companies?
Yeah, I think if you've ever been on one of those journeys, you have that kind of visceral memory of all the ups and downs of going on that journey. And I think it does give you this really lasting empathy for how difficult that journey is. I think you realize firsthand that, there are problems absolutely everywhere when you start a company. Like the wheels always feel like they're kind of coming off the bus. And then these kind of real gyrations of high to low, where one day you think you're going to take over the world and the next day, you won't have the money to pay payroll. They're very real. And so I think how we bring it into our investing is, I think the definition of a relationship that we talk about a lot is the ability to share problems. And I think so much of the time, if you don't have that empathy on the other side of the table, you end up just being in hyper sales mode, basically, as an entrepreneur. So you're kind of constantly selling this dream and this vision, and you feel like you need to have all the answers, and you need to be really buttoned up and not necessarily show the kinks in the armor. And so we really try and use our own experience to kind of permission and hopefully even mandate that type of relationship building, where we can't help the founders unless we understand what they're struggling with and what their problems are. And so they have to feel that sense of trust and openness to be able to give us that information. So I think leading by example and saying, when we were building our businesses, these were the things that we really struggled with, or oh, I had an issue with this, and kind of showcasing that you yourself are anything from perfect and went through a lot of kind of issues and challenges along the way, typically that means that they will feel more open to doing that themselves. And then I think the second thing is just, as we were building our businesses, the most helpful person to us was oftentimes another founder who was building their business at the same moment in time. So I think there could be this, sense of hubris in a way, or almost, you're pressuring yourself too much to think that you're the single source of truth. You sit on someone's board and you're their investor. And so you're this omniscient, sort of source of guidance and mentorship and information for them. And instead, I think we really try and see ourselves as nodes in a network, and really try and orient them and sort of, point them in the direction of someone who is probably more likely to have that really current set of knowledge and information share, and not pretend that we have all the information ourselves.
Okay, when you were a founder, you were actually in a biotech genetics company, right, in the US?
Yeah.
Super interesting, and it's clearly deep tech. Do you think it's time for European deep tech these days? Will that grow? Will that expand?
I really do. I think it's the most exciting area for me personally. I think if I look at the UK, just as one example, 6 of the top 30 universities on the face of the globe are in and around the UK. It is the most unbelievable hotbed of really strong academic talent. And a lot of these kind of so-called deep tech types of initiatives, they stem from quite cutting edge disciplines, like things like synthetic biology and artificial intelligence. And, those are more recent advents, even as you think about people who are getting PhDs in the area, et cetera. So actually the fact that we have that kind of initial ground of talent that's coming out of these organizations and these academic institutions, and then you have that at the same moment in time where there's this cultural push from those individuals being potentially a bit more conservative, traditional, risk averse, going to, Goldman Sachs with their AI PhD, or McKinsey, or staying in academia. They're now actually spinning out with the courage to start a business. And they don't see that as a euphemism for unemployment. Like, they see that as actually what the smartest, most ambitious people in their networks are doing. So I think you have this amazing confluence on the talent side, where this extraordinary talent with deep scientific, deep technical backgrounds have the courage to kind of go out and start a business. And I think that that's kind of relatively underserved by the capital side. And that's why it's one of the areas that we're most excited about at Kindred, is how can we actually provide something to them that in the US you would have like any number of firms that stand for doing that, like whether it's, Lux or DCVC or Founders Fund or 8VC, they're sort of like the moonshot type of outcomes that are scientifically, technically really hard. But if they work, they're just astronomical in terms of outcome. That's a place that I think there's going to be a lot of excitement in the years to come across Europe. And then I think the second thing I think about with deep tech, and specifically on the sort of scientific side, is I find it fascinating that when we back kind of a pure tech play, we oftentimes are thinking about the incumbents in that market. And those incumbents are, places like Google and Apple and Amazon. And those organizations are very sizable and powerful, but they're like 20 years old, 25 years old. Like, these aren't dinosaurs by any means. They're sort of founded in the late 90s for the most part. And then I think about the world of biology and pharma. And, those, if you look at Roche or Siemens or Novartis or Pfizer, like those organizations, some of them date back to the 1700s and the 1800s. They're 300-year-old companies. It's kind of unbelievable when you think about it. And so with those kind of multi-hundred billion and trillion-dollar market caps, you can see the rise of startups with that talent that I talked about, hopefully backed with the right kind of capital, that can actually do things fundamentally differently than a 300-year-old organization can. And so I think that's where I see, the opportunity for the next $100 billion outcome in Europe, and sort of not just the unicorn and the decacorn. I could really see it being somewhere at that intersection of deep science and deep tech, together with the right capital base.
Mm. And so when you moved from the US to London, these are some of the things that you already saw in the US, the investments into the deep tech, the big companies that have been able to develop on that. Could you talk a little bit about the opportunities from an investment perspective that you see in Europe today, the trends, what other things excite you, and what does Europe have to offer entrepreneurs today versus the US, and why stay in Europe?
Yeah, I think there's a huge amount of opportunity in Europe, specifically for some of those reasons that I mentioned before, where I think we are, behind the U.S. in some ways in terms of, not necessarily having that capital base in place, not necessarily having those examples of, multi-10 or $100 billion outcomes that have come out of Europe. But I think if you look at it on a trajectory, that's exactly the inflection point that we're at. And so that's why I think it's kind of an exciting person to be building here. Like I'm building a firm and the founders that we back are building their organizations. So I think that entrepreneurial energy is hugely exciting here. I also think that, there's been this really interesting trend where you've seen VCs actually kind of be risk averse in some ways, which is a little bit antithetical, but there's certain risk that VCs typically don't like to take. So they don't like to take technical risk or scientific risk. They're already saying, well, we've got some team risk, we have some market risk, we have some commercial adoption risk. We can't add that layer on top. And what you need, I think, is a number of examples of companies coming through and actually being really successful and kind of returning these great multiples to firms, that you can see actually that sort of risk aversion starts to fall away as they start to pattern recognize the things that actually can break through and become really exciting businesses, even sometimes without really significant revenue bases. And so, even things like DeepMind, I think, are really interesting examples of places where you can build this kind of intrinsic value in amalgamating some of the smartest kind of technical minds to solve some really big problems. But there's like tail end value creation as opposed to, I need to get to $1 million in ARR in year one. So I think we're kind of at that moment also where we're like training or sort of showcasing to VCs that actually you can build, really meaningful outcomes in the time frame that you need to make sense for a venture capital fund with these really deep tech businesses that still have some degree of technical or scientific risk.
Dealroom just published its third quarter report, and it seems that the available capital in venture in Europe is practically at an all-time high. And at the same time, we're going through a pandemic. Could you comment a little bit on this, and also, just talk a little bit to the founders who are thinking about fundraising these days?
Yeah, it's a great time to be an entrepreneur. And I found myself saying that every year since I've come here pretty much. And every year it just seems to get more true. When we founded the firm in 2015, we put together a pitch deck and it was like, okay, these are the types of folks who are out there kind of in the market as, co-opetition for us. We compete with them, but we also collaborate with them. And then just recently in raising our second fund, we put together that slide again. And it was like the list that was this long in 2015 was like this long in 2019 or 2020. So there's been this explosion in pools of capital. That's true at every stage and in every geography. I think that the other trend that we've started to see, though, is that there's this kind of globalization of venture where I still believe that kind of the pre-seed and seed stage where it's like Kinga and an idea type of thing, really the kind of hyper local elements of you being able to, really add that hands-on value, build the depth of relationship to kind of be on that journey for 10 plus years. I still find that to be more local, but as you get into the alphabet rounds, like the sort of ABCs, it really is a global play. We live in such a data rich world that those signals and signs are sort of discernible from everywhere, whether you're sitting in Silicon Valley or you're sitting in Beijing or anywhere in between. And so what we've seen is this huge explosion in competition and capital availability at the later stages in particular to kind of take advantage of the ones that look like they're getting escape velocity and they're going to pop. I think what's happening is just this secular shift essentially to technology and to companies that can have this extraordinary value creation within a short period of time. And I don't see that reversing. So when people are saying we've had the venture dollars going up for a long period of time, at some point, we're going to see a crash and it's going to go back down. I'm not really in that camp of belief. I actually think that a lot of things, and coronavirus in some ways even fueled that, ironically, is that, everything has shifted into software. Now things are shifting into automated hardware as well. Tech is sort of eating the world at the most kind of in the most general phrase. And so our view is, if there is this abundance of capital, it's obviously a great time to be an entrepreneur. But from the venture perspective, you just have to be different. You have to stand out in some way, shape, or form with either the way in which you practice the craft, who you are on the team, how you structure yourself, what the economic model is, what operating model you have to provide support for your founders. And our view was it couldn't be a set of words on a slide anymore. It had to be a set of actions that you were taking that were referenceable peer to peer, which is how entrepreneurs learn the fastest.
Okay, well, that's very good. So in this kind of tough times, on the one hand, the fundraising environment has been, well, different. The fundraising has happened or is happening online. Founders are a little bit not used to this. VCs are not used to this. A lot of things are just different. Anything in particular that you could say to the founders out there these days, what they should focus on and come with?
Yeah, I think it is more difficult to get a sense for the human on the other side of the screen, because so much is being picked up on in person that are kind of the nuanced, small, unspoken body language kind of interaction. So I think you have to work a little bit harder on that. I think you need to potentially be more proactive about what you share in terms of the why. I think a lot of people just dive directly into their product or the company that they're building and the traction that they're seeing. But actually what we care about, and this is maybe speaking more specifically about Kindred, is the who. Who are we investing in? Why are they doing what they're doing? What's their depth of motivation? Why are they never going to give up at building this company? What insight do they have into solving this problem? And then, of course, at some point you get into kind of, here's the solution, here's our product, here's our roadmap, here's kind of the usual stuff that you see in a venture deck. But I find the best meetings are actually the ones where we're not kind of clicking through slides and they're not more transactional on Zoom, but you're kind of trying to, just as we're doing now, have a conversation with the other person, understand who they are, what's driving them, and actually just make it as interactive as possible.
That's very good advice. I think founders should build these relationships as soon as possible. And I think Zoom, at least the tool is there. I think a lot of us have also more time for relationship building as a result of lack of travel. So hopefully.
Yeah, but I think you use that really good term, relationship building. And I just really encourage people to think about that. Like, you're not on the Zoom call to click through the slides or to give someone sort of information. I think information can be really seamlessly communicated via a deck that you send through and someone could click through on their own time. But I agree with you, it's about the relationship build. So if you're taking 30 minutes to build a relationship with someone, like, be thoughtful about the intention behind that and what you think relationships are and how do they get built and how do you build affinity and how do you show vulnerability and how do you show your passion for things. And that kind of energy, I think, needs to come across. And maybe you need to work a little bit harder at that kind of stuff online.
Definitely. After so many Zoom calls, to keep the energy level high.
Totally. Make sure that's why you have lots of coffee, always at your desk. That's what you need. My best advice.
I'm into green tea.
You're braver than I am.
Thank you so much, Leila. What I wanted to ask at the end is that you're also a mom of 3 small children. You're doing plenty of other things other than venture, so you must be super busy. So could you just take us a little bit onto your personal front? What excites you? What are you watching? What are you reading? What are the kind of things that you're enjoying doing outside of work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of my partners in the firm has a concept that he talks about a lot, and I've stolen it from him. But it's a word that he uses, which is about things being generative. And so sometimes you go into a meeting and you give a lot of yourself, right? Like, you give a lot of your mental capacity and your energy and your emotional energy and everything else. And sometimes you come out of that meeting and you actually feel more energized, even though you've given a lot to it. And that's when something's been generated in that meeting. Like, it's been a generative meeting. And sometimes, you go in and even if you're not speaking that much or you're not exerting a lot of energy, you come out and you feel just unbelievably drained. And so I think the thing that I think about a lot in my calendar and in my structure of like my personal and professional life is, how do I maximize the things that for me are generative? Because it sort of weirdly enables you to have more than 24 hours in the day, or at least like make those 24 hours like hours that are hugely productive and constructive, and each thing feeds the other thing. So for me, I think, it is very busy with, 3 young kids and trying to run a firm. And then obviously all the portfolio companies, which you want to work with each individual one and give them all the support and help that you can. And I think that kind of orientation around, well, if I take 45 minutes in the morning and I have breakfast with my kids, that's going to generate energy for me. And that energy is then going to serve me well in the interactions that I have with my founders and at work, et cetera. So I used to think about it as kind of zero sum. And if I take time away from here, then I won't have as much time for this other thing. And now I try and think about them as kind of additive and like value creating for one another. It's always a balance, and it's difficult, and I get it wrong a lot more than I get it right. But overall, I think if you love what you do, then it's just trying to find that space to be able to throw yourself into all those different aspects of your life, which ultimately should give you a lot of energy.
Wow. Thank you so much, Leila. It's great being talking to you. You are full of energy. You are full of inspiration. So it's been great having you today on European Women in VC. Thank you so much for your time, and let's continue the dialogue.
Thank you so much. It was a great pleasure and privilege to be here. Cheers, Kinga.
Thank you. Bye.